Well, in that case, in the same area of study, our next talk will be led by Maria Zakaria, also again Mirella Conica and Caroline Jagoe. And the title is The Power of Relevance, a relevance theory approach to enhancing communication in aphasia. So again, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
No, I will. Hello, everyone. I'm truly delighted to be here with you all today, and thank you for joining. I will be discussing also another part of relevance. So I will be talking about the power of relevance toward a relevance theory approach to enhance communication in aphasia. So this is a part of a larger IRC laureate project, Co-Construct, that Mirella already talked about, that uses naturalistic conversation in English and Arabic to investigate how communication support strategies work for people with different type of communication disabilities. For the purpose of this presentation, I will be talking about the analysis of secondary data through a realist review methodology. So just to start, aphasia is a communicative disability affecting language processing due to brain injury, stroke, dementia, or any other type of neurological disorder. Aphasia can be devastating to individuals with this condition that restrict their participation in work, family, and community life. It has a negative impact on their quality of life and well-being. So, of course, effective communication is crucial for maintaining relationship, participating in social activity, and accessing essential services. So for the communication partner strategies, it's very important. Successful communication in aphasia heavily relies on strategies employed by communication partners. And Mirella already said that this is considered as micro-intervention. And this is usually done by the communication partner, which can be a family member or a caregiver that will use a strategy such as gesture, pointing to picture, rephrasing, or even writing keywords. This is a small example of a communication partner training who said, depending on what the problem would be like, with my dad, writing things down or having him try to write it down and seeing if, he could get it out that way. So this shows us how writing things down can help to communicate better. And it can help sometimes to enhance communication between the individual with aphasia and their communication partner. So my sub-research question is, how do specific communication support strategies influence relevance in conversation involving people with aphasia? We know that existing research on communication partner training has primarily focused on measuring outcomes, such as improved communication skills, rather than exploring the underlying mechanism and contextual factors that influence the effectiveness of the communication support strategy. So we were looking more at if the communication is successful or not, rather than digging deep and seeing the mechanism. So this necessitates a shift from focusing solely on intervention outcomes to exploring the contextual factors and causal mechanism that mediates those outcomes. For the relevance theory and clinical pragmatics, there has been some application to question of clinical nature, but the full potential has arguably not been realized in this respect. So relevance theory was chosen as the theory engine as it offers a robust explanation of the cognitive processes underpinning pragmatic processing, making it particularly suitable for investigating the impact of communication support strategies in conversation involving people with aphasia. So now I will move to the methodology. I will be talking about the realist review. The realist review seeks to understand what works for whom, in what circumstances, in what respects, and how. We talk about the causal mechanism. It is explanatory, so it allows the research to go beyond simply noting what works and consider the crucial question of why and how intervention achieves their effects, especially the micro-intervention that I already mentioned. It applies a heuristic of strategy, context, mechanism, outcome, configuration, and it applies this principle to a structured review of the literature to generate this conversation for further investigation. So these are configured in the way that they are attempts to articulate how, in this case, a specific communication support strategy interacts with the context to trigger a certain mechanism in the sense of influencing the effort required or the number of effects achieved to yield a certain outcome. Now that I've explained what a realist review is, let's look at how we did it step by step. So this slide will show us the overview of our realist review process. So first, we did a structured search to find papers related to communication support strategies. Then we looked at each paper and extracted the important information, like what strategy were used, the context, what the results were, and what theories were behind them. Next, we used the relevance theory to help us think about these effects of each strategy, how easy it was to process, and how much useful information it gives. I should mention that the articles themselves are unlikely to have an explicit or even implicit relevance focus, but realist evaluation provides a means to identify researcher hunches or assumption about how and why intervention or communication support strategies work. And then generating SCMO through application of relevance theory, focusing on cognitive effects and processing effort. So here we were developing explanation of how the program work by understanding the interplay between elements, context, and stakeholder reasoning. And finally, we used a process called retroduction. And this means we looked at what happened in these studies and we worked backwards to understand why those results happened. This helped us build a strong explanation about how and why certain strategies work for people with aphasia. This slide shows our preliminary finding from realist review. So as you can see here, I'm using the Prisma diagram. We started with a large number of identified paper, 6,944 to be exact. And then after removing duplicates, we screened 2,358 abstract. We then excluded a significant number of paper at this stage, leaving us with 59 full text to assess. For those, we further excluded some papers that were not about conversation or that had no strategies or were not related to our topic, as well as some others. So ultimately, we included 48 papers in our review. Here we come to the SCMO configuration. So this slide presents our rough generic program theory, which explains how communication support strategy used in the specific context influence the communicative outcome. This framework comes from the Co-Construct project document from 2023. So as you can see here, strategy refer to the communication support method used like using a keyword, picture, or gesture. The context is broad. It can cover a social-cultural, relational, or conversational aspects. I heard someone asking about the context, and we already mentioned that it is broad, and sometimes it's not nuanced when we find it in the papers. So it can be the relation between the individual with aphasia and the family. It can be sometimes the topic discussed or the mean used or any linguistic pragmatic factors. The mechanism is the processing response. It either works by reducing effort for the hearer or by increasing effects, the number of effects for the hearer, or sometimes both. Finally, the communicative outcome is either understanding, which means communicative behavior signals a close enough interpretation and improves future communication, or it can be unresolved misunderstanding, which risks reducing the future communication opportunities. You already saw this table. Mirella showed this table. So this slide shows the communicative support mechanism and outcomes developed in the co-construct project. And as Mirella said, there is two main type of mechanism, those that reduces effort for the hearer and the communication support strategy that increases the number of effects for the hearer. So now I will walk us through some examples to illustrate this process and highlight the importance of this kind of in-depth understanding for developing robust program theories. So this is our first example. Okay. This is extracted from a paper. So here you can see the family reported. 4 participant member of people with aphasia mentioned this modality, writing multiple times when conveying strategies that facilitated communication with individual with aphasia. It would have been very hard to get where we are without the writing part. Written information was also an effective means to improve the comprehension of information, especially when reading was combined with verbal presentation of information. So here, if you want to look at the SCMO configuration, we can see that the strategy is using written information. The context is a family member interacting with a person with aphasia. The mechanism, so that is retroductively generated. If we go back to the table, you can see here that we have limiting the class of potential context and reducing reliance on a single modality by using an identical base explicature in another modality. So this reflects the two mechanisms, M1A and M1F, that reduces the effort, as you can see here. And the outcome is a better understanding by the person with aphasia. Another way to, another core component of a realist review is to help us develop some program theory is an if-then statement. So if we want to look at it as an if-then statement, we can see that if a family member of a person with aphasia uses written information, which is the strategy, then the person with aphasia will understand, this is our outcome, because the strategies will be reducing the processing effort by limiting the class of potential context and reducing reliance on a single modality. So instead of only verbally talking, we have other ways such as writing, or in another case, using gesture or picture. So this is our first example of mechanism that reduces effort. Another example is from the same paper. So here we have the following paragraph, clearly stating the topic, facilitated communication between the CP and the individual with aphasia and could prevent communication breakdown. When this did not occur, it was frustrating for the communication partner. Starting anew, yeah, she'll change the topic and then what are you talking about now? This was described as a successful strategy to aid the individual with aphasia comprehension of what was said, just getting him on the topic of what you were talking about. So here the strategy is clearly stating the topic before starting or changing the topic of a conversation. The context is also a family member interacting with a person with aphasia. The mechanism is to manifest that the conversation will be productive and accessible, and to draw particular attention to a specific personally salient information, which reflects the two mechanisms M2A and M2B, as you can see here in the following table. And this will reflect these two mechanisms that increases the number of effects for the hearer. And so the outcome will be understanding by the person with aphasia and to prevent the communication breakdown. If you want to see it as an if-then statement, we can see it as the following. So if a family member of a person with aphasia clearly states the topic of conversation, which is the strategy, then the person with aphasia will understand, because the strategies will increase the number of cognitive effects by drawing attention to a specific personally salient information and manifesting that the conversation will be productive and accessible. So in conclusion, our work is focusing on two main areas. First, using relevance theory within a realistic review of literature pertaining to communication support strategies provide the potential to generate avenues for further refinement of program theories. And then by integrating our chosen frameworks, which is like the relevance theory, we can also analyze communication partner strategies as micro-intervention, and so occurring in real time within the larger social context of conversation and in clinical practice. So this approach offers a new methodological avenue for investigating how communication strategies will help in communication disabilities and conversation, as it allows us to systematically uncover the mechanism that makes communication support strategy effective. So our next step, finally, here are our next steps. So we have completed the English data collection, and we are now working on the collecting Arabic data, and we are also finishing the full realist review. It's underway. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm ready to answer your question.
Wow. Thank you so much, Maria, for this talk again in an area that is really needed. And I'm really happy that you guys were able to apply relevance theory in this area. And then I think our first question belongs to Tim Wharton. Tim, go ahead.
Hello. Thank you, Maria. That was great as well. I can't suddenly you've yeah, that was really lovely. I really enjoyed both those talks, and it's come at a good time because it's reminded me of all this stuff that we thought about last year. It's not really a question for anybody in particular, so Maria or Mirella or Caroline, and it's about this issue of context. So I'm sorry to go on about it, but I think it's not. I mean, I think you make specific reference to this idea of retroduction. You know, you retroductively think about the mechanisms. I wonder, because I think the notion of context still is a little bit sketchy in this, the extent to which you could retroductively think about context, because, you know, the context is so important. And at the moment, I mean, you're using relevance theory, which is, I mean, it's just great. And it's so perfect for this work, as far as I can see. But when you talk about context, you're just saying married couple talking at home or something like that. But of course, relevance theory has so much more to say about context. And I wonder if it would be worth, and I know you've got so much data than you know what to do with. So, I mean, I'm not trying to make more work, but could you not enhance the notion of context a bit using this retroduction and, you know, and point to a few other things about the context that might be relevant to the interaction?
Yes, thank you for your question. I think this is one of our goal. I think after collecting all of these data, especially that we have two languages in English and Arabic. So about the context, I think it's not very clear, especially even when reading articles. It's not so nuanced contextual information were not documented in the papers. So context is not only a family member talking to a person with communication disability. It could be talking about a certain topic at a certain moment in a certain place. So it is much more than the relation between the individual with communication disability and the communication partner. However, I think that when reading the literature, it's a bit limited to some relation between the communication partner or even the topic of the conversation. But I think one of the strengths of our project is trying to find out later on what can be considered as a context, especially that we have two different culture, many languages, and much more, maybe code switching or any other thing. I don't know if I answered the question.
Yeah, maybe I've misunderstood what context means here. Perhaps that's what Caroline's.
Yeah.
No, I think you're exactly right, Tim. I'll just quickly speak about the retroduction piece for context, because I don't think that that will be possible within a realist framing unless we call it something else, because within a realist framing, the retroduction can only come from a theoretical perspective. So the reason we can retroduce the mechanisms is because relevance theory tells us that there's processing effort and number of effects, and so we can use that to retroduce. Relevance theory, while it gives us a good definition and concept of context, it can't give us a theory of a context for a specific conversation. So we could deduce it, but we couldn't reproduce it.
Okay.
The challenge with so the paper that Maria extracted from there has limited to no details of context. I'm hoping that when Maria begins extracting from studies that use conversation analysis, that it will be easier to extract more nuanced context because of how rich and thick their description is in. I'm not a conversation analyst. I don't align myself with that methodology, but it has the benefit of being hugely rich and thick in its descriptions. And they tend to produce large, long conversation samples and extracts from which we can deduce some context. But the majority of the papers, because they fall within a healthcare professional sort of framing, the degree of the context is biographic, demographic details, and maybe handedness of a participant. You know, it's really quite limited in sort of a medical model framing. So for the realist review, the notion is just to try and get a little bit at researcher hunches about why these things might be working. So you'll notice that what we've got here is not what you would typically see as what a paper reports on in a medical profession, but it's often sort of this background thing where you've got a sentence where you can get an idea of what the researcher's hunch is as to why they did this. We taught the communication partner to write keywords to reduce the challenge of working memory or something, and we can reproduce what they think is happening there. But yeah, you're right. Context is hugely problematic for the realist review.
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. So I think there's things to think about there. Seems a shame to be constrained by the realist review. But anyway, I mean, yes, lots of things to think about. It was really great, Maria. Thank you very much. I didn't realize it was going to be the co-construct show this afternoon.
Sorry, Tim, we should have warned you.
No,
I don't think
it's
we're
great.
constrained by realist review. I think we're constrained by what researchers report in their papers for this bit that Maria's doing. I think that's the constraint. So I don't think there's enough there for us to deduce anything. We would have to invent context because there's nothing there for us to draw from.
Yeah, but if you were taking these examples from interviews that you'd set up, for example, could you then reproduce the concept, the context?
I think we could deduce the context by certain mechanisms, like Morella's example, where the wife didn't interfere. Therefore, we deduce that on the same page. Yeah.
Yep. Great.
Mirella, would you like to add something? Go ahead.
Yeah, just to again to sort of acknowledge Tim's suggestion that we can kind of look back at things and, like Caroline said, deduce the context. We have spent many, many meeting times where we're arguing over what's happening in one critical moment, where I have one interpretation, Caroline has another. So what we do then is we bring in the eye gaze data and we bring in the commentaries, and that really does help figure out what's happening. I remember another instance. The participant had an intellectual disability. I don't remember what the father was doing with his face, but he thought it was helping the conversation. When we watched the commentary, the participant said that he was looking behind the father's face. He was looking at the switch on the. So these are small things that we can try and use to help us. But yeah, like Caroline said, we might have to invent context.
Mhm.
Great. Yeah,
Mm.
thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Kirsi has her hand raised. Go ahead, Kirsi.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you, Maria, very much for this presentation as well. I was also thinking, just considering, I think this is part of the context issue as well. You said something about written information reducing the effort for the participants, right?
Yes.
In that model, yes. But I was wondering, how do you assess that it really reduces effort? Is that based on the literature? Because I could assume that it might not, adding information might not reduce effort for a person with aphasia, particularly if they have difficulties in literature skills. So I'm just thinking about how you are assessing that it would be in a way easier to add a modality there. So is it something that you ask the participants, or is it something that you somehow infer from the context that conversation goes on?
Well,
What do you believe?
it is the SCMO configuration. So as you can see, we always have the outcome, and the outcome is either a better comprehension or the participant will not understand what's the information about. So it's usually the outcome that will allows us to know if it is reducing the effort or not. And as we talked before, that it's not about the context itself, it's the context, the strategy. So for example, we can't use this strategy with someone who has aphasia and maybe a visual problem. So it's really about each case, about each context. And we had many meetings, Caroline, Mirella, and I, discussing, seeing the videos, discussing the mechanism, trying to figure out how this works, what's considered as a mechanism, the bidirectional continuum that Mirella talked about. So, but usually we see it as the configuration and not only the strategy by itself.
Thank you.
I don't know if I answered your question.
I think you did. I was wondering, and thank you for this. I was wondering because there was in the list, there was this kind of but it was, I don't know, was it one slide in earlier there that it was in the list that the multimodality would reduce effort. The next one,
Yeah, it's this one.
yeah. So this one, yeah. But
yeah.
But I
When
do
reading
see
was
your point
combined
very
with
well.
verbal present.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So it's when, for example, if I'm talking about a specific topic, let's say I'm talking about a vacation, and I know that he went to Portugal, and then I can write the name on a paper. So this is what I use by using same modality. Excuse me, this is what I mean by using multiple modalities for the same information. It's a mechanism.
Usually the communication partners, they do have some sort of an idea why and when they start using that, then that might be a very interesting one to figure out.
Yes.
And I think conversation analysis might be very useful here as well. But this is very interesting work. Thank you so much.
You're right.
Do we have more questions at this moment? Well, if we don't have, then I might just pose one question because I'm more in the area of relevance theory, and this about the context also tackles on the way relevance theory explains it, because we employ a number of contextual assumptions to infer meaning. And I was thinking from your examples, don't you think in a way you are narrowing down the context in order for your patient to understand? I mean, they all sum up to this point.
Well, do you mean that the context, we're using the context to narrow the...
Let me rephrase it, because you are employing the terminology context to what I would
Yes.
call more or less the setting. And in relevance theoretical terms, I would employ it in a different way. For example, when you say that you clearly state the topic before stating it, for me is a way to narrowing down the context in which he's supposed to infer the meaning. And also, the other example was limiting the general contextual assumptions. So all of them seem to me that they point in the same direction as to narrowing down the contextual assumptions for inferences.
So for us, it's more the strategy. When I clearly state the topic that I will be talking about, here it's more about the strategy that I'm using to help the participant, so I can manifest that the conversation will be productive. So in that case, we're not considering this as a context. It's more like a strategy that we are using, the communication partner is using to increase the number of effects for the hearer.
But I think if I can just step in, because I think what Angelica is saying, if we go just back to example 1.
Okay.
And I think the challenge is that this word context is used in different ways in the two methodologies that we are employing, right? So this is a challenge. But you can see that the mechanism is reflecting exactly what you are saying, Angelica, that by using this written information, one of the ways this is working is by limiting the class of potential contexts for interpretation. And we see that a lot, that mechanism 1A, we see that happening a lot with a lot of the strategies, exactly what you're saying, limiting the contextual assumptions that the person will be drawing on.
Yeah,
And I
go
think
ahead, Mirella.
So I think what you're saying makes exactly a lot of sense, and it's exactly what we're trying to account by with the mechanism. So if you can think of, let's say this is a critical moment, what we're calling the critical moment where a strategy is being deployed. The setting, what we're also calling context, is influencing what's going to trigger, happen, whatever in the critical moment. Within the critical moment, the context, the mechanism is to limit the potential context for the participant. So we have two types of context, if you can think about it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Maybe we need a different word for it.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because when Tim started mentioning context, because this is a very strong, may I say, terminology in relevance theory, and it's very specific what it relates to. And because you're using relevance theory, then the definition becomes a little bit hard to spot. So I don't know if it's a good suggestion or not. If you would, instead of using context the way you're choosing a different terminology, I just said setting or something else for you, because you're using relevance theory, use it in the way the relevance theory applies. I think it would maybe made it more easy for the general public that uses relevance theory to immediately understand each thing what it refers to. I don't know if Tim would like to add something.
I'll just say thank you for that suggestion. I like the word setting. And I will just say that if we were in a realist conference, we would have to switch back to context, because their whole wording is context, mechanism, outcome. So we might have to think really carefully about how we frame what we're doing, because this word context is hugely problematic, because it's a central feature of relevance theory and it's a central feature of realist evaluation, but in very different ways. So maybe we do need to rethink about, maybe it's setting, context setting, or something that allows us to cross these two disciplines in a way that respects the providence of each, but is clear to the other.
Now Tim wants to add something. Go ahead, Tim.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, I wanted to add something as soon as you spoke, but I got a bit lost in my buttons and things on this Zoom. Yeah, I mean, I just think it's a matter of, I quite like the idea of setting, actually. I think it's just a matter of using terminology that's appropriate to the audience. That's all. I mean, I think it would be fairly minor to have to do, really. Absolutely, in the context, in the scenario of presenting this work to people who are interested in realist review, the word context is very important. But as Angelica points out, as soon as you use that word to a bunch of people who are relevance theorists, it brings certain expectations to mind. So perhaps when presenting to a more pragmatic audience, you use the word setting and then have a separate context, which in our field you can retroduce happily as much as you want, and bring some richer notions of context in. But I mean, it's clearly a really fruitful amalgamation of two approaches, isn't it? You know, they seem to really sit well with each other, using relevance theory as the engine, as it were. So I think those are minor presentational things. The nuts and bolts of what you're doing is just great and really valuable. So thanks. I really enjoyed those sessions.
Well, we then close now. I would like to thank you very, very much for your presentations, for everyone that was present here. This is such an important work, well needed, and I'm looking forward to hear much more about it. And thank you all. And when we finish, I hope you can move to the other rooms to follow the other presentations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.